And Paul's interview on Morning Joe yesterday, writ large.
Sounded so much smarter than usual.
Actually, let me continue where we began.
You like that? Yeah, it did sound smart. If I could do it with a catty K British accent, I would be there.
We have Rick Santorum, George Pataki, Hillary Clinton, and Elizabeth Warren in the news, which we'll get to in just a second. But what Rand Paul said on Morning Joe in your interview, ISIS and John McCain are responsible for the rise of the Islamic State. ISIS exists, he says, and grew stronger because of the hawks in our party who gave arms indiscriminately, and most of those arms were snatched up by ISIS. The GOP presidential candidate said Wednesday on Morning Joe on MSNBC. The Wall Street Journal continues to write, in Mr. Obama's second term, the U.S. has largely followed Mr. Paul's foreign affairs preferences to the letter, and the result has been more chaos and disorder. If he wants to run as an Obama Republican on foreign policy, he shouldn't also adopt the Obama trick of rewriting history. It reflects poorly on his judgment as a potential commander-in-chief.
Donnie, what do you think?
I think, look, it's interesting. As a guy who plays liberal on this show, I'm a hawk by nature.
Right.
Having said that, there is a cogent argument to go back and say, hey, look, W doesn't go into Iraq. Saddam Hussein is there, much less ISIS. Argument, you know what, if we did take out Assad, you'd have more ISIS there. So this is one of those things you can make a left brain argument, but the right brain wins and says, no, it's not right there. But in the end of the day, he does make a cogent case.
I think the argument that Republicans should make, and I think that the Wall Street Journal did make, is, well, actually, they didn't make this argument. If you were Rand Paul, if we'd followed Rand Paul's foreign policy, there would be no ISIS, because we would have never gone into Iraq, and Saddam Hussein would not be. Saddam Hussein would still be there. ISIS would not. If we did not pull out of Iraq the way we pulled out of Iraq, right? If you had just gone George W. Bush or Dick Cheney's way, ISIS would not be there because that void would have never been created. The argument you could make is, if you're a Republican, that the Wall Street Journal did make is that it was Hillary Clinton, people like Hillary Clinton, that were wrong both times. That were wrong saying, let's go into Iraq and then let's leave Iraq quickly. That created the first void. And then after order was brought, which Dexter Filkins and everybody else says was brought in 2008, 2009, pulling out created a new void that did create the environment for ISIS. So Hillary was wrong on Iraq twice. I think that's an argument certainly that Republicans would make, that I would make.
I would also give Rand Paul kudos in the sense of I like that finally you have Republican candidates who, whether you agree or disagree with them on certain issues, saying, look, I'm running in a general election here. And, you know, have the kind of the kahunas to kind of do that and not necessarily. A lot of people saying it's the death of his campaign, and now he's down. I think.
I think it's the birth of a real conversation.
It is the birth of a real conversation.
And this hopefully will be a bellwether for other Republicans to say, look, I don't just have to appeal to those 80 caucus voters in Iowa.
Willie, I've said it time and time again, whether I agree with what Rand Paul said or not, the fact is Republicans have lost 5 out of the last 6 presidential elections in the popular vote. Rand Paul yesterday shook things up. Other Republicans need to shake things up too on a lot of issues that, like for instance, I'm waiting for the Republican to get out there. And we talked about abolishing the Department of Education. That sounds pretty radical, but talking about, instead of top-down education, talking about getting as much power and authority and money to classrooms. And tear down the federal bureaucracy. Who's going to say that? Who's going to say on the other end of it, the only thing the federal government can do is infrastructure. We need to spend more money. We can spend more money on education, spend it wisely, but we need to spend more money on infrastructure, and we need to spend it more wisely. I mean, I think that was good what Rand Paul did yesterday, shaking up the conversation.
He shook it up, and that may be music to the ears of moderates, and you heard some Democrats saying, yes, he's right about that, but I think in a Republican primary, that's still a difficult argument to make.
Oh, yeah.
Rick Santorum jumped all over him yesterday. Bobby Jindal jumped all over him. I think Rick Santorum said Rand Paul is now the Bernie Sanders of American foreign policy in our Republican Party, and it just reinforces the view that a lot of people have of Rand Paul, that he's an isolationist, that he wants to withdraw when there are great threats out there. Republicans can make the case that's a bad idea right now.
But I think that more Republicans are skeptical, Mika, of the next war than want to go into the next war. With all due respect to Lindsey, who I like very much, Senator McCain, who I like very much, and others, they're actually in the minority. Not in Washington, D.C., but among Republicans I've spoken to over the past 20 years, as far as the use of military force. Republicans, until George W. Bush, were much more nuanced and careful. They were more like Colin Powell.
Yeah. Let me get